All right, everybody, welcome to Academic Yak podcast. Sorry, we're gonna get a little adjusted here, but welcome and thanks for joining us again for another amazing episode. This is the podcast where we yak about things going on in the academic world. There's such a variety of things that can be studied, so we just bring on a new guest every week. So obviously, we have a new face today. Just a couple of quick reminders: we do record every podcast. So know that this will be recorded. If you have to step away for any reason, you can come back and watch it later on our YouTube channel, which is just Academic Yak on YouTube. We also have a Twitter account where we post the upcoming episodes, remind you guys what's going on. So check that out. It's yak_pod on Twitter. That's yak_pod. We have an upcoming episode next weekend, so make sure you tune in for that one as well. But for further ado, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah.
I'm Chris Gillow. I am, wow. How do you introduce yourself in a place like this? It's, well, I go to the University of Arkansas. I'm a graduate student up there. Married, a couple of kids. Very non-traditional student in as far as all of this goes. Didn't come back to school till I was 40, because of some other stuff that had gone on in my life. But the desire to study and learn about and eventually be able to teach communication specifically was just too strong at that particular point in time. So when I was looking for a new path, that's what was natural. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to pursue it successfully up to this point.
Sure. So, you're a non-traditional student. We met in the graduate program in the Department of Communication up here. But before that, like you said, non-traditional, you had a whole life before you came here. So tell us a little bit about how you came to decide to pursue your undergraduate degree and what was that journey like for you?
Absolutely. So prior to starting academics, I did a whole lot of blue collar stuff. To be honest, I was in the Navy for a couple of years. I've worked more fast food places and full service restaurants than I'd care to remember. And I drove buses up at the university. I drove transit buses for about 10 years. And unfortunately, I had an injury, some damage to my lower back, which meant I couldn't drive buses anymore.
Yeah.
And I was lost for about a year trying to figure out how to stay in the industry through my injury. And that was actually 2016, because that was such a great year for everybody, to be honest. And I failed at being able to successfully pursue that. And at the end of that year, I came to realize that I couldn't do what I knew how to do.
Sure.
So I had to learn to do something new.
Yeah.
And I realized that the list of things that I didn't know how to do was so much longer than the list of things I did know how to do.
Isn't it for everybody?
Yeah. And that essentially meant I could pick for the first time in my life, really, what I wanted to do. Military family, blue collar stuff. You just sort of roll along with that sort of thing. So being able to actively choose, I said I want to teach. I want to get up in front of people, and I want to teach. And just being passionate about communication in general, the processes thereby, the media, interpersonal, all of those things. I came up to the university, and I said I want to get a degree in communication, and I want to be able to teach when I'm done. So, what do I need to do that? What does that process look like? And they said, well, you're going to need to have a master's degree in order to be able to teach. Well, right, in anything. If you want to go to a high school and teach, you're going to need to get a master's degree through the education program. If you want to teach at the university, even at the lowest levels, you're going to have to get a master's degree. And I went, okay, well, I guess I'm getting a master's degree. And they followed that up with, well, you haven't been in school for 20 years, 22 years. We need to have something more recent than that, because they wouldn't take me just off the street. So I ended up spending a year, 2 semesters up at NWAC, Northwest Arkansas Community College, which was fantastic. They were wonderful. Did well up there. Took those credits, transferred them down here. at the end of that first year, and just ran. One of the things I loved in dealing with the faculty and the administration, actually, at this particular university is it came in with a very clear plan. I said, this is what I want to do. So be aware when the time comes, that's exactly where I'm going to go with it. And they were like, okay. I mean, everybody changes their mind, but sure. And I said, no, you don't get it.
Yeah.
And then we got to the end of that path, and it was, I'm here, I'm still doing it. How can we go into it? And they're like, wow, you really do mean it.
Well, and I think that that's an advantage of being a non-traditional student in a lot of ways is you've already spent time doing the things that you don't necessarily want to do and trying to figure out which one of those is the least miserable option. And, you get to a point, like you said, where you're like, well, I did like what I did, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do still. And, life happened and you had to figure out, okay, well, I kind of only have now to change my course a little bit. And, you've had all that time to figure out what is it that I like and why do I like it and why don't I like this thing and how can I tangibly make this into something different. And then that opportunity proposed itself to you and you were able to kind of turn it into something. And I think that really goes a long way. And I think that that's a good thing to have in a space like this because everyone that we've had on here so far has for the most part been traditional. They've been students who went to high school and then they graduated and then they went to college and then they did their undergrad and now they're back in grad school. And I had that little bit of a gap, but that's not really non-traditional to take a two-year gap. I feel like a lot of people take 1 to 3 years in between undergrad and graduate school. But for you to have taken that 22 years, you really had the time to kind of figure out what it is that you liked and didn't like and then tangibly turn it into where you are now. And I think that says a lot too. Like you get a lot of students, this is something that Gabby and I had talked about, I probably with you at some point as well, where, half of going through a graduate program is just like you did the damn thing, right? And so that's where we are now is you've kind of figured out that going back to college is what you want to do, and then you did the undergraduate and you're like, okay, the master's is the option to be able to get in front of a classroom and teach. And now you're getting that opportunity and you're testing the waters of being in front of students and doing the teaching assistantship, and you're doing the damn thing while also being a student yourself. And there's a lot of challenges that come with that we talk through and work through all the time in our group of babes, as we so lovingly call them. But tell me a little bit about how that has gone for you, going from undergraduate and saying, okay, we know the next step is the master's. We're going to work on that. And now you've done a complete year in the master's program as a teaching assistant and as a student. So kind of talk me through how that has been validating and how it's been a struggle at times and just, that push and pull of like, I'm doing the thing that I want to do, but I still have to get the degree to do it in this more professional way of like I'm officially hired as my only job is to do this thing. So kind of talk me through that.
So when I realized that going into the graduate program would almost have to include a graduate assistantship, it's so financially such a large financial struggle to try and do it without that.
Yeah.
So and that most likely in that GA position, I would be teaching classes.
Sure.
And when it was proposed to me, they were like, well, you're going to have to do this thing. And I'm like, yeah, please.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm here for.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, I want to teach at the university. So the idea of being able to have the university at the communication department teach me how they want people to teach classes while paying me to go to school with them and get, it's not much, but, a little bit of a paycheck on the side.
It's enough to live by.
It is. It
just
is absolutely
enough.
And it really ends up being essentially like a paid internship.
Yeah.
Come work at our company. We're going to train you. We're going to educate you and, give you the opportunity to continue working for us after that internship.
Hopefully.
Well, hopefully. Yeah. I mean, there is, at least the opportunity will exist. And I walked into the master's program with such a low level of expectation on myself.
Yeah.
I was convinced that I had hit my mark in undergrad and that I was entering into this brand new
Yeah.
thing, and I was just gonna drop every ball and everything was going to go terribly.
Imposter syndrome, as
no,
we love in
absolutely.
call as well.
It's absolutely terrible. And on top of that, knowing that you have a desire to do a thing
Mm-hmm.
does not necessarily mean that one, you're actually going to enjoy it
Sure.
once you do start doing it, and two, that you're going to be able to do it well.
Yeah.
So we combine all of that with COVID. So when I started teaching,
Oh, the whammy.
it
We're
was
all hit
right.
with.
When I started teaching, it was over Zoom.
Yeah.
Now I had never opened a video chat platform in my life prior to the beginning of August last year. So it was, you're going to teach over this thing. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm going to teach over this thing? Oh,
Yeah.
you're also going to be taking classes over this thing. You're not going to be able to sit in a classroom. So it's a new level that I'm already terrified of, in a new format that I don't have any experience in
Yeah.
a new job that I've never done before on this platform that I never.
But to a degree, that was kind of an advantage that we had because we didn't have to transition from teaching in class to figuring out how do we use this expectation that we've developed, these skills that we've developed in
Right.
this setting, and then immediately try to transpose that. We have no basis, so we are only learning all of
Right.
it in this one sense. Now,
Mhm.
in the summer for you, you're getting a little bit ahead of me in that, like, you're getting to transition
Right.
now to the classroom. So do you feel like maybe to a degree that has kind of worked to your advantage?
I really do. I think it is. It was very much like a soft open.
That's what I feel like too.
So for all of the struggles, and it absolutely was a struggle. For
Sure.
both the students and the instructors trying to figure out how to do that. I would not want to have gone the other direction.
Yeah, no.
I would not want to have started teaching in front of people and then go, oh, how do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
In a Zoom. Whereas I could take the things that I had to stress in the Zoom, which was keep people involved and make sure that everybody's listening and try to, have as interactive a classroom as possible in this Zoom setting. And I believe those skills transition very nicely
Yeah.
into a live setting. Now, the ability to use technology to present things is easier on the Zoom than it is in the classroom
Yeah.
because you can just share a screen or
Yeah.
what have you. The flip side to that is I get a chalkboard now, so I can
Oh my
write on my chalkboard, and
I didn't realize that was at the camera.
it's totally a thing. Slide over just a little bit.
Oh no, you're good. No, we're fine. You just scoot over it just a little.
There we go.
Nice.
Yeah, we can totally make that happen. No, I think that all of this is just confirming that I am loving this particular job.
That's
and
great.
I was able to, this last week, bring some of my own personal research interests into teaching this class, which is, it's essentially canned. As
Yeah.
you well know, we don't have a whole lot of leeway in how the class is taught, which is,
Sure.
only right for TAs.
Yeah.
Don't give us a
Well,
whole
and
lot
it's
of.
kind of helpful too because we don't have the basis that we need to really develop our own curriculum.
or the
Like we
time.
all took the class, but like taking it and teaching it is just so incredibly different.
100%. So, with it being as canned as it is, as rigid in its structure as it is, if you need that for to take things off your plate because
Sure.
we're taking lots of classes, and as you well know, multiple master's level courses all at the same time is
It's a lot.
it's a race, it's a marathon, and you just run it all the time, no
Yeah.
real time off during the semesters. At least. So having that taken off your plate is fantastic.
Yeah.
But it does stifle creativity and
A little bit, yeah.
and individual input.
Without burnout, it stifles.
No, absolutely.
As someone who burned
Absolutely.
out to make creativity available in the classroom,
Oh,
it's hard.
yeah, absolutely. And I think they have to play to, I don't take this the wrong way, the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
Make it as little work as possible for people to be able to do this job,
Yeah.
which is essentially
Well,
how
and
they
the
have it
thing
set up.
is, we're in a position where you and I both came in with the option of when we graduate, we may very well teach. Like that was for you, that was a goal. For me, it's an option. It's fine. But for a lot of the people in our program, their goal is not to remain in higher education. For a lot of them, the master's is a means to increase their salary when they graduate,
Right.
to go out and work in the corporate or the nonprofit world, which is great. That's one of the wonderful things about our degree is it's so diverse in what you can actually do with it when
Right.
you graduate that, we have that opportunity. But that means that like there are people who have no interest in teaching, so they have to find a way to say we have 15 TAs, 17 TAs
Yeah.
that are coming in and teaching public speaking to students on our campus. How do we, make it to where those who want to engage more have the flexibility to do so, but for those who don't, we still, are able to, be an individual and teach what we already have built for them without having to do all the extra work that someone like you or I might want to put into it.
Right. Right.
And they do a really good job. Like our supervisor has been
Mhm.
incredible for allowing us
She's
that
been wonderful.
flexibility.
And yeah, I mean, for the folks who don't want to, be as invested in the process of teaching, where it is just, I say
Yeah.
just, but just a job. It's a paycheck. It's how they're
Yeah.
paying for their schooling. May as well be a part-time job somewhere, and
Yeah.
they can totally just leave it at work and not bring it home.
Yeah.
But I find it's easier for me to include more of me
Yeah.
in the face-to-face stuff
Hmm.
than I did
I'm interested to see how
on
that will go.
on Zoom. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
super excited for you being able to do that. I think you'll do great.
Yeah, we'll see. The imposter syndrome never goes away.
No,
It
I
doesn't
don't
matter
think
how much you do.
I don't think it ever really does.
We've got a couple of our peers who have joined us. So hey, MD Murd, we're excited that you're here, as well as Danny, Brianne, Jay. We're excited to see you. We know you guys in real life, and you guys are commenting on imposter syndrome, which we all know. Again, it never goes
absolutely.
away. And yes, I would also die without Lauren. She's one of my besties. I love her to death. She's great. So now that you're here and you have kind of felt that validation, you were kind of sharing some stories with Nick that I've heard of how students have just kind of reinforced that they enjoy you teaching and how heartfelt that can really be. And, for you, it overcomes the negative. For me, I'm still just like, oh my God, that one student hated me. I can't do this. But that is no less the conversation we will not have right now. But, through that process, you're also a student. So let's kind of redirect and think about your goals as a student within this program. I know what you like to study, but, I would love for you to share with the audience. And as a reminder, you guys, please feel free to ask questions. I'm watching the chat. I try to interject where I feel like it makes the most sense. But if you have any questions for Chris at any point, please let us know. We would love to answer any questions you have. But with that in mind, tell us what it is that you like to study and kind of why that's your thing.
Okay. In a very general sense, cinema, film. I love mass distributed media. I think it's probably the most accurate marker and litmus test for what's going on in any given society at any given point in time. In addition to it being, entertainment.
Yeah.
And I think if you can, I had one of the other students in our program say that they loved the morsels of truth or introspection or what have you. It's actually Tom saying those moral stories and what have you, those hard points in a movie, but they went down a whole lot easier when they were wrapped in cheese. and I've taken that, and being able to look at these pieces of entertainment and how they wrap these hard topics and these hard questions and these sometimes major criticisms of society and power structures, and wrap them up in something that's a little bit more palatable to be able to get it out there to hit more audiences. In specific, I've learned through undergrad and working through my graduate stuff that I am drawn very heavily towards superhero narratives. Originally comic books, or at least in my experience, it was originally comic books, and then just big boom in the early late 90s, early 2000s. You had the Batmans, you had the Blade, you had Spider-Man.
Blade is so good.
Blade was great. I think they should have stopped at like 2, but and the TV show was just way too much. But then we had Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002, which really just kicked things off again. We hadn't seen anything that big since Batman in '89
Yeah.
with Michael Keaton and
Mm-hmm.
Jack Nicholson. And then the really big risk came with Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, and I've lost the director's name, but
No good at
it's okay. With Iron Man
Yeah.
in 2008, that kicked off the MCU, and we had what was truly I think, an honest interpretation into cinema of the multi-faceted universe that is comic books.
Yeah.
Because you have this issue and you have this issue and you have this run and you have this run and you have these different characters and they can touch each other and all of their universes,
Yeah.
are interconnected, and we hadn't done anything like that in cinema at all previously. And 15 years and 22 movies later, we finished the first big chunk of it, and they're still going strong. Excuse me. So, with that, I get all the time, why, first, why movies? And I just sort of brush those people off, because if you don't understand why, mass distributed media is important to be able to look at, then we need to have a completely separate discussion.
Well, and as communication scholars, I think that, just to pause for a moment, so far we've talked about, for me, like health communication and looking at the importance of like the types of messages that we convey, that are important to public health, right?
Absolutely.
With Gabby, we talked about a little bit of critical race, a little bit of gender, and how the minimalist movement has to do with socioeconomic status, and then that kind of oppressiveness that our society puts on people, and those boxes that they place on people, and the importance of studying how what we say impacts those things, and how we develop our messages, and what are we actually telling people. And then we kind of transitioned out of communication a little bit, talked with Isaac about engineering, and we talked with Toby about public health, and now we're back into communication. And I think that kind of bringing it back in for people who have consistently watched, this is another really great example of the diversity of the communication field, and why I can have 3 of the first 5 episodes be comm scholars, because you're talking about something completely different. And, this is something that you and I and a few of the other babes have talked about a lot, is that, like, I could care less to study the communication aspect of film. Personally, I think it's fascinating to read. I love listening to you guys talking about it in the TA office. Often that's when I'm the most quiet. I'm just consuming all of this new way of addressing this type of media. I don't ever want to study it and write about it, because I think it would take the fun away from me of what I enjoy of just like going and watching a movie or watching TV. But that doesn't take away from but there is such an incredible significance of what movies and television convey. And I think the first moment for me of realizing this importance was just before I met you all, when Black Panther came out, and it was such a big deal for the Black community. And, again, this is where, coming from a town of 2,000 people in the middle of southern, Bible Belt, Arkansas, comes in too, is like, well, why was that such a big deal? And it's like, well, representation is a huge deal, but also just seeing the way that that's conveyed to the public. It's the messages that it's showing people. It's not just that there's now a movie that is a superhero that has a Black lead and a bunch of Black other characters that are thriving. It's the way that they presented them through their costuming, and the way that they gave them strength, and the way that they brought that snarkiness and that sass and that strength and the emotions that our society had not seen of, hardly any Black movies on the mainstream area. There were lots of things that were going on television that, the Black community was well aware of, but it hadn't reached the broader audience in a way that brought them true representation in this way, and especially not through Marvel movies and superheroes. And when I saw that, I was like, why are people freaking out about this? I thought it was a really great movie. I enjoyed it just like any other. And then it kind of hit me. And then I met you all, and I was like, people study this for a living, and they really talk about that in the same field that I'm sitting here looking at pamphlets in a fucking doctor's office.
Yes.
Right? But both are equally valid. And I think that that's a point that a lot of people don't understand. Again, being a communication major in undergrad, grad school, whatever, when we're studying communication, we're looking at the specific messages that are being conveyed to people, and to see I'm reading the chat of Gabby and Danny are taking over there. Have a great conversation. I'll check that out in a minute. But to say that we are the same focus is the same as like people saying, oh, well, I'm in the natural sciences,
Right.
and you're studying math versus computer science versus, which arguably those things also have all of their niche breakdowns. But we all study very different things, and so I want to kind of bring that into why I'm bringing you on here, is because like you study communication on a piece of paper. We have the same degree. In conversation, we're completely different focuses. You're looking at film and how mainstream media conveys specific types of messages to people, and I'm not. And I would have never consumed media the way that you do. Probably still won't. Like, I love you and I love what you study, but like, this is just not what I do. So that is really cool that that's what you do.
Absolutely.
But please continue.
No,
Share.
100%. And I think Black Panther is a very good example. It was a black director, Coogler. We had a primarily black cast, and they were addressing issues that are uniquely theirs, and we're able to create not only the story but this place within the story that completely under the control of these people who live these stories.
Yeah.
We had something similar with Wonder Woman.
Yeah, with women making costumes.
Absolutely, and a woman director, and female led, and it is arguably, if you watch Wonder Woman, it is almost the same story as like Superman, which people are more familiar with. Only they put a woman in there to do it and introduced some of the struggles that she was dealing with. And looking at interesting fact about the Wonder Woman movie, she was introduced in comics in the early 40s and had never had a cinematic movie, an actual movie. I mean, there was a TV show. Everybody loved Linda Carter, if I remember right, in the 70s, but had never had a movie until, was it 2016, 2018?
2016 and 2017.
Somewhere in there.
I feel like every time you say 2016, Kelsey says 2018. So let's say 2018.
That sounds like a plan. Right, but being able to see that and to look at what is it within our society that caused that to happen? What was different in the 20-teens that had never existed up to that point that allowed it to be made? Because within a year or two of that one being made, we also had Captain Marvel, which was the MCU's, Marvel Cinematic Universe's first female-led superhero movie. And both of those were not only popular, but commercial successes, which showed the film industry that this was topics that could absolutely be addressed.
Sure.
But there's two things that really just for me point out the significance of what media film specifically has in our society and the effect that it has on us. There was a documentary done by someone over in England, Dr. Terence McSweeney. He did a documentary on the effects that war films have, both on the society and on people outside of that society. So America makes war films. People outside of America watch these films and say, oh, this is how they see war.
Yeah.
And people in America watch these films who have never personally experienced these situations and say, oh, this is what war is like.
I've never thought about people, and this is so dumb because, like, obviously it makes sense that people watch movies outside of their own country. I do that all the time, but I never thought about the fact that what we're showing is our understanding as a collective, not always as the individual, but as a collective of what that experience was like for us. And then that there are people like you who go out and are from a different country and watch it and they're like, oh, so this is what they're conveying to their people, that this is what this is like. I never would have thought about that.
Yeah.
Not super important, but it's just kind of a weird thing that I never really thought about.
Absolutely. And the point to make with that is during this documentary, They were talking to a Vietnam veteran. This was some number of years ago, but they were talking to a veteran of the Vietnam conflict after he watched a movie called Apocalypse Now, which is about the conflict in Vietnam. That one, as a side note, was special because they didn't take any money from the Department of Defense or the CIA to make the movie, which meant that the Department of Defense and CIA didn't have any creative control over how the movie was made. So the people who made the movie had a much freer scope for presenting what they felt, at least, was an accurate depiction of that conflict.
Oh.
So they talked to a veteran of that conflict after he had watched this movie and said, "Hey, is this a more accurate representation of the conflict in Vietnam than some of the other movies that had been made?" Fully expecting well, yeah, obviously, what have you. And his response was that he was over there for, I want to say, 4 years. Right, he was over there for a long, long time. And he came home and had spent enough time consuming the popular media about these things that he stated he could not accurately remember exactly what it was like
Brainwashed
over there.
That's wild.
So if this person who had direct experience with these kinds of circumstances and situations is unsure whether his memories or the media that he's consumed are in fact more real, then if I consume media about situations that I know nothing about, if I watch movies about an inner city, Detroit, Chicago, New York, I've never spent a lot of time in those big cities, then that's all I have. So obviously that's what it's like over there. So I mean that's the power of that. And as far as the pervasiveness of superhero narratives in this whole tapestry, there's a line from a movie called Hancock, where and no, it's a great movie where one of the characters is talking to the other one and saying, because he's a superpowered individual, he's essentially a Superman clone for the movie, not literally a clone of Superman, but for the story he had very similar powers. And he was like, "What are we?" Because he had lost his memory, didn't know what was going on, and what the other character told him, who was a similar, super powered person, said, I don't know what we are. We have been called angels. We have been called gods. And today, suddenly, we're superheroes.
Yeah.
So that right there made me take a step backwards and look at the mythology of superhero stories in general, which arguably started in the 30s with Superman. Those were our first, what we currently recognize as superhero narratives. But if someone were to tell Beowulf or St. George and the Dragon or Hercules, any of these old Thor, there's a direct tie actually between the MCU and Thor. But if you were to tell any of those stories today, they would probably be classified as superhero narratives. So we've been telling these same stories for as long as there have been people to tell stories. So the next step for that, or at least for me, was why do we keep telling these same kinds of stories? Absolutely. And that leads us to the idea that all of these superhero stories give us a central point that has two main features, well, three technically. One of those features, if you break it into two, is a measurement of what we as a society at this particular point in time consider to be virtuous or laudable traits. Iron Man. Let's look at Iron Man as a recent example. He is rich. He is attractive. He is intelligent. He is successful. He is virile. All right. Goes out and sleeps with lots of people. He is also a view of what we consider to be vices or things that are not okay. He has chemical dependency issues. He's an alcoholic. He has some mental issues, his narcissism, his self-doubt, his greed, what have you. He has physical infirmities, damage to his body that has to be kept at bay through technology. And we see him throughout the course of this story use those things which we consider to be virtues to overcome those things we consider to be vices, and is able to succeed at the end because of
the
that.
American dream.
Absolutely. He is essentially an anthropomorphic military industrial complex. But the
yes.
The other thing that we pull out of these superhero stories is the idea that one person can make a difference. All superhero stories are by nature anti-democratic, which just means that, I know, and then that term you're like, ooh, there's a bit of a squeak that goes on with that, but it just means that these people take matters into their own hands. They do not want the combined will of the masses to tell them what should happen. They see a thing, they want to do it, they feel that it's right, they are capable of doing it, so they do it. And at the end of the story, they are proven to be right for having taken that stance.
Right.
Batman is actually a really good example. So there's been some arguments that he's not actually a superhero because he's just a normal person. I would argue around that because of the nature of the stories. But in theory, if you had the time, money, dedication, and training, you could be Batman. Anyone could be.
Yeah.
So he is one of our ultimate anti-democratic everymen who, with the right circumstances and drive, bootstraps, do the thing, conquer evil. And all it's what all of these stories give us is a look at where we are and what society is doing, and how we as one person can really make a difference in the world around us.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting thing too. And I know that you and I, again, with Kelsey, always, the three of us, we took interpersonal this summer, so we spent quite a bit of time in the TA office afterwards trying to get assignments done and be productive members of the academic society, however draining it may be at times. But we spent quite a bit of time about, what has influenced us and like why has it influenced us, and how cinema specifically, with you and Kelsey being, cinema focused people and me being kind of that plague brain to pick from outside of that realm of understanding. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about is how, there are different types of superheroes that all collectively do the same thing, right? There are different types of superheroes that appeal to different people. Some of them are regular people who just have the drive, the money, the ability. Some of them have superpowers, that vary. One of them super strong because we know the buff men are the ones that succeed, right? All of these things that always have some sort of problematic thing behind it, and we can talk about that for days. But one of the things that I always thought was interesting, and I know I've shared this with you, is like my favorite superhero, quote unquote, was never one that was the main character. It was Storm from the X-Men. I always idolized Halle Berry's Storm. I loved that character as a small child, and all throughout my teenage years, that was who I wanted to be, because they were never the one that carried the burden of, I have to be the one that makes all of the decisions, but they still played such a critical role in being a team player and making things happen. And when the time came, she was one of the ones that really made things happen. And so for me, it was seeing that played out in cinema and then listening to you talk about how each of these characters have played such an integral role in society. And I think that, everyone always, not everyone obviously, because I do not, but, everyone, when they have these conversations, is always talking about the main person. Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, now Deadpool 2 and all of these main characters, but there are so many like sidekicks, if you will. I've always hated that term, but all of these other people that were considered beta characters, if you will, that for me always played so much more into the success of these roles. And that's kind of what Danny's talking about in the chat too, a little bit, just X-Men are nothing without her. And I agree. Like, I think that this is something else that these types of movies have shown really well, is that even when you do have the one that's been glorified and put in the leadership position and is the end all be all, they always show that supportive team with them. And I think that Marvel and DC both have done a really, really wonderful job of showing that you always have your vices and that your team and your support system, chosen and given, which they show a lot of really good push and pull with that chosen and given situation, that support network is ultimately the one who gets you through. And I think that has been a really big thing that our generation, growing up with that, like when X-Men came out, I was like probably maybe 10 or not even, right? So I literally grew up with the boom of the Marvel and DC universe movies just extremely blowing up and doing so well. I grew up with that. And so to see that you study them and their impacts on society, without being like a film scholar, but a film communication scholar, and how all of these things are giving specific messages, is so interesting, because every time we have this conversation, it brings me back to those moments when I watched Storm for the first time and I was like, wow, look at that. Like, I could be a supportive person for the person who is leading and making those final decisions. And I think that taught me a lot more than, say, the lead character would always do. And I think that when you talk about Marvel and you talk about all of these different movies and TV shows and things that have really boomed, and how they have collectively shown, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will, you always do a really great job of bringing in the different aspects of those movies and how they tie into the creative diversity, from the back end, because I don't think about who the producer was or who the person making the clothing was or who the set designer was or who edited it or anything like that. I don't ever think about that stuff. But you always bring that in because you're like, well, the reason that Wonder Woman did so well and why it was so formative for, be it somewhat problematic in a lot of ways, but for, feminist movement, is that like women were the ones displaying it. It wasn't a man who wanted to have, a hot lady with her boobies out the whole time, right?
Right.
They gave them reasonable clothing. They gave them a reasonable purpose. They gave them, a legitimate reason to be doing the things that they were doing throughout, being superheroes. And I think that by providing it through that lens, they've just come so far. Like you said, though, I think that a lot of this is just like we're still telling the same stories, but it's a reflection of the time period that we're in. And I think, in the Department of Communication, we talk a lot about where are we as a society and what are we doing. And, within the last few weeks with critical race theory drawing on a bunch of negativity, as it does periodically in time for whatever ridiculous reason, I think that these movies are showing that kind of change as well. We're seeing people who are holding cinema accountable for, no, you're gonna have diversity, damn it, and it's not gonna be that white man who's gonna produce all the movies, and not gonna be the white man who directs everything and dresses everybody. We want not only the characters to be diverse, but we want the production company to be diverse. We want the presentation to be diverse, and we want everyone who's in that process to also be diverse. And I think that we're seeing that shift go really well right now for specifically MCU, because they're the ones that are kind of thriving out there, out and about in the world. But so moving forward, you're looking at this and you're wanting to teach, and I know kind of what your capstone, your end project is going to look like, but just kind of briefly as we start to kind of wrap up, tell us a little bit about what it is that you're specifically looking at doing and what the long-term goal is from coming from this program in this field of study.
Before we jump into that,
Sure.
just real quick, you're talking about the side characters, or the beta characters. I think that we get really good examples of those characters making all the difference. In a lot of ways, Batman isn't Batman without Alfred.
Absolutely.
In the Tom Holland Spider-Man, you've got Ned, who, I want to be the guy in the chair. I want to be that
Yeah.
support, character for you. And specifically with X-Men, as you brought up, that's a keystone of, lots of different. I mean, it's absolutely a metaphor for people who fall outside of the norm within society, be it
Yeah.
race, be it religion, be it sexual preference, be it
Yeah.
gender identity, what have you, and how some of them have an easier time being a part of society. Some of them really don't. But when they gain acceptance and are able to work together, they're able to do some amazing things. So that's a very good example of that, and
Yeah.
one that I unfortunately forget to bring up as I get, so very narrowly focused on my
okay.
particular stuff. Speaking of that, my capstone is as I've told you, the creation of a curriculum for an upper level undergraduate course based around presentations of power and image and identity through superhero films in American society. And I've got it. I'm actually opening the class talking about a piece that Tolkien wrote back in the late 30s about fairy stories. And he talks about a thing called the cauldron of story, which would take a whole nother hour to talk about, really. But it's the idea that everything that's ever been told, everything that's ever happened that was societally relevant went into this big pot. And every time we want to write a new story or come up with a new story, we take elements out of this pot to make that story. And then it goes right back in. So everything that we're telling now has its roots culturally, societally in our past, and to be able to recognize that and see those pieces and how they evolve as new things get added is fantastic. And that's where we're going to start that, and then we go into definitions. We talk about what is a superhero movie, and look at those things that represent the defining characteristics of the genre. I mean, if you're talking about horror films, you need to talk about what makes a horror film a horror film.
Yeah.
After that, talking about mythology, as I've said, the anti-democratic nature, the being paragons of what a particular society likes or doesn't like. We're going to talk about that for a little while. And then we'll get into gender and sexuality representation within superhero films, which I had a really good example brought to me that I'm going to be using for that one, which is actually a movie on Netflix called The Old Guard.
My first thought was Ramona Flowers. Go on.
No, she's fantastic. But unfortunately, Scott Pilgrim is the superhero in that one, if he's going to be. And that's frustrating for me because I think she was a much more well-rounded character.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother thing. But no, it's The Old Guard. It's Charlize Theron is the lead. They're immortals. They run around doing cool things. And not only do we have a female lead here, which is, I am confident in saying, is never at any point during this film sexualized. Not once, which is astounding to begin with. But we also have a pair of characters who are main characters who are in a homosexual relationship. And at no point is that a part of the storyline. It just exists. And it's not hidden. It's very much treated like any other romance that you would find. Right, which that kind of representation is so important. And I think when we're talking about that and how that could never have been made 20 years ago, why it's so important. And then we're going to talk about ethnicity representation within superhero films. I know we absolutely are, and I am so excited. By the way,
She brought up Jujutsu Kaisen.
Say again?
Danny was bringing up Jujutsu Kaisen.
I am not familiar with this.
The female leads are so well written and empowering. She says anime, baby.
Oh, okay.
And never
all right. I will absolutely have to look that up. That's fantastic.
Send it in the babe chat. So we can
yes,
read it later.
please do. But there is our very first ever American-made, Asian-led superhero film is coming out later this year.
Yeah.
And I am so excited for the possibilities of where that will go. Because a lot of the examples that we have now of ethnic diversity in leading roles in superhero films is so sparse.
Yeah.
And we had Black Panther, but in the 20 years before Black Panther, we had um, five superhero films with black leads, three Blade movies. Oh, sorry, six. We had three Blade movies. We had Catwoman. We had Hancock.
Catwoman was the shit when I was a kid.
It was, but it was an absolutely terrible movie, unfortunately.
It's so bad, but it was. I loved it.
And a movie called Blank Man, which you probably haven't, and that's kind of my point.
Yeah.
Is in the 20 years before Black Panther, that's what we had for black lead representation in the superhero genre, and it left a lot of viewers feeling very flat.
Yeah.
And trying to move forward from there has totally been a thing.
Yeah.
And the idea of this is to not only introduce critical thought of, movies are more than just,
media consumption.
Pure entertainment, that it influences the way we see things, it influences the way we understand the world around us. And being able to see these stories and recognize why these themes keep coming up, why are these things so important, what do they reinforce, what do they challenge, with a really cheesy coating of capes and tights,
which we're moving a little bit away from. That's good.
I'm kind of okay with it.
I am too. I am too.
Although the idea that even within the genre itself, they point out some of the problematic nature of such things. I am so just went and saw Black Widow.
I know, no spoilers.
I know, no spoilers, but it is also a primarily female cast.
Yeah.
Even more primarily female than Wonder Woman was.
Yeah.
If you get rid of the island of the Amazons, if you look at most of the story moving forward, it was still mostly male. This one is mostly female through most of the movie, and is also directed by a woman. And they do a little bit of poking fun at some of the ways that women are represented in these movies. There was a whole lot of flack, has been a whole lot of flack, about the way female superheroes are posed, both in film and in the comics. And they throw that at us in this movie, and it was beautifully done, and I was very happy to see it. And that doesn't spoil anything for the movie. I was very happy with the movie. I really hope that it is as successful commercially as these Marvel movies have traditionally been up to this point. There hasn't been one that's lost money yet since
it'll be hard with COVID, but I think it's also a good point maybe with kind of trying to come out of COVID. I know that the Delta variant has been causing a lot of concern, but hopefully with people getting vaccinated and whatnot, that the movies can somewhat make a comeback. And I think that too, with, isn't it Marvel that partnered with Disney now? And so Disney Plus's platform has
all of that.
Yeah, it's given everything, and I think that has made all the difference for me. And I was kind of worried with COVID happening, and the movies were already kind of on a decline, and going to the theater was on a decline, which is wild to me. I grew up going to the movies, but I knew a lot of my friends that did not. So I know that we kind of were, I don't want to say set back, but like our family really valued going. We went every year on Thanksgiving. Fun fact, we would have a late lunch and then we would go. But one of the things about that is that I was kind of worried, like we said, these movies have made such a critical impact on kids and on even adults for a really long time. And with the movies going away, I was a little worried about the whole experience. And I know every generation says that about something that happens. There's always some form of thing. But with Disney Plus picking up Marvel, I know a lot of people were really upset about Disney buying Marvel, and reasonably so. But I mean, from what I've seen so far, things have been going really well, and I've really appreciated appreciated that Disney has at least tried to kind of let them keep their own pocket of joy. But by putting those movies on that platform where a lot of families are, I think that we're going to be able to kind of maintain some of that joy and that formative, team player mentality, and how, like, sometimes a regular Joe Schmo really can make a big difference in someone's
Absolutely.
life. And so I'm hoping between that and having a course like you're trying to design for your capstone, it will bring people back to that. Remember, like, the media you're consuming, it's not just because someone said, I'm fucking bored and I want to make this thing, and they shit out a movie. I mean, some people do that, but like, usually there really is thought that goes into it, and sometimes people will listen to people like you talking about this, and like, you're looking for something to think about, and it's like, but if you talk to the directors and producers and the people who wrote the stories, and go back and read the comics, like, no, really, that's what they were made for. And we just got kind of lost in the big explosions and the cool animations, and we forgot to look at what those stories really mean for people.
Absolutely.
And I think that we could benefit a lot from having a class like this. I have to admit, when you first brought it up, when we first met, I was like, that's the most ridiculous thing. I would never take a class like that. I mean, I like Marvel movies, but I don't want to study them.
Right.
But when you break it down in the ways that you do and really talk about, like, it's not just that we're talking about a cool movie or this huge cinematic universe that has a bunch of cool shit in it. I mean, that's a good part of it, but like, really thinking critically about, like, what it is you're consuming and how it does impact you. And even if you don't consciously think about the impacts of the media that you're consuming, the subconscious impacts play a big role in that too.
Yeah.
And I think that we forget those a lot of times. And yeah, so I think this is a really cool project that you're doing, and I hope that there's actually a time that you get to teach this class, because I think some people are going to be really excited to have a class like that available to them, and some people will think it's a blow off, and then they'll still end up learning something cool from it.
Yes.
I feel like every blow off class I've ever taken has ended up being some of the most formative classes that I've had. So, you have more support in the chat.
Okay.
Danny says she would take that class as well.
And for the record, we have moved, and for the class itself, originally I was focusing entirely on the MCU.
Yeah.
We've moved away from that
Yeah.
quite a bit, actually. And so, I mean, the current list of movies, and we've got Captain America, we've got Deadpool. Deadpool being the perfect example for me of codes and conventions within superhero movies, because they make fun of all of them.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, what are they poking fun at? Oh, those are the
It's
important
not
things.
just a comedy.
Satire
Yeah.
is important
Yeah.
because it shows you what's really important. And then for mythology, it doesn't get any better than Batman and Superman.
Yeah.
And I'm going with more recent ones: Christian
Yeah.
Bale,
Yeah.
and the Man of Steel. I've lost his name
I don't
off
know
the
what
top
his
of
name
my
is.
head.
Everybody's hot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love you, babe.
And I'm gonna get some crap from folks for not being Henry Cavill. That's
Henry
his name.
Cavill, yeah.
Um,
I just think of him in The Witcher.
yes,
He's been doing really well on that
absolutely.
too.
And then Wonder Woman, and
Yeah.
then the Netflix one.
Yeah.
And then looking at Black Panther, and probably Hancock. So Marvel is maybe a third
Yeah.
of those movies, and then two that are completely outside of the comics
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it. And what I'm actually really excited about, beyond being able to introduce this to the people, is the last several weeks of the class will be students presenting their movies.
Yeah.
They get to pick movies, and they
Oh.
get to say, okay, you didn't talk about this movie. This is why this movie is important,
Yeah.
should be involved,
Yeah.
in the conversation. And I'm going to let them step up in front of the class. We'll watch their movie, and then they defend it, and then we talk about it afterwards. And at that being at the end of the course, we, in theory, if I've done my job right, I set them up into a place where they can look at these stories from a critical eye, and then have a critical voice through this lens, and be able to, take my podium for themselves.
Yeah.
And
Give them that autonomy.
absolutely, and give them that platform.
Yeah.
At very least the 15 people that are in that class, but how many people get to actually have that kind of voice?
Yeah.
And it's exciting to me. I like being able to offer that opportunity to
Yeah.
people.
I'll take one last question that Danny put in here and ask you just very briefly, and then we'll wrap up. I can hear my neighbor is starting to have a jam session, so I don't know. But so Danny said, "I'm sorry that I'm so obsessed with animation, but have you thought about including any cartoon superheroes? Teen Titans, Star Wars, The Clone Wars, The Incredibles, Invincible, etc."
I have just started watching Invincible, so I can't speak too much about it. But the first episode, if you've watched it, you know it's really big deal at the very end of it. I would love to have a discussion with you about whether or not Star Wars would qualify as superhero stuff. I think you have a point to make there, but no, I hadn't considered those. I was actually looking at The Incredibles, believe it or not, as part of my gender and sexuality stuff. Because in the first, and I will be talking about it even if I don't show it, because in the first Incredibles movie, we have a very traditional gender setup. You have the guy going out and doing things and making a difference. Mom stays home, keeps the house running. In the second one, their gender roles swap, and he stays at home and takes care of stuff, and she goes out and does that. And being able to see that change is absolutely very, very important. I do want to include Teen Titans is another great example. The cartoon superhero movies into this discussion. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time for it to be its own section. That and the other section that I would really want to include if I just had 2 more weeks in a semester would be to look at non-American superhero films and compare those to, how do, because if we're saying that all of these superheroes are reflections of the culture that they're part of, let's look at what other cultures are doing with their superhero films and see how that compares across the way. So there will be discussion. I'd love to show them in class if there was a chance to do that. But thank you for bringing the animated stuff back to the forefront, because it gets lost. It really does. And I think it's a very underappreciated subgenre
Gosh, it
within
makes
the
me think
superhero
of
stuff.
like Powerpuff Girls
Oh, yeah.
and how
I love
amazing.
that movie, by the way.
Yeah.
I love the Powerpuff.
Everything
yeah.
Powerpuff Girls. The show, we've got finally Mickey saying Sailor Moon is a really good example. There's a lot of really great animated options for superhero representation that was more of a daily consumption than the excitement of going to a movie and watching a full movie. So that would be an interesting thing. I wonder if there'd be a market for a second class that focuses on animated superhero representation.
And that's and absolutely, and that would allow us to go past feature length film, and dive more into things like serials and and series, and such.
Danny said that her roommate said to talk to Dr. Sherling in the German department. He does an entire class on German comics and superheroes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so
Yeah.
here at the University of Arkansas, that's fantastic. I will write that down after this. That is somebody that I want to talk to. Thank you.
Well, that is all the time that we have today, but I know we could go on and on and on and on, and maybe we'll be able to bring you back on sometime in the spring. Hopefully we can get Danny to buck up and come over and join us one day for an episode as well. We would love to have you. If you're interested in being on the podcast and talking about your academic adventures, it doesn't have to be in communication. As you will know if you've seen our previous episodes, we kind of bounce all over the place. But if you'd be interested in coming and speaking with us, just email us at academicyakpod@gmail.com. You can also direct message me on Twitter at @yak_pod. I will upload this episode that has been recorded as soon as I can. And with that said, thank you so much, Chris, for joining me today. This was an absolute delight. I know it's hard to contain all the excitement and all of the easy ways it is to get derailed in the conversation, because there's just so much to talk about. But I hope that you'll come back on and join me for another episode, and we can maybe talk about some different aspects that we didn't get to today. But Thank you for being here.
Any time at all. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us in the chat. For those of you who stuck it out to the very end, we appreciate you so much for being here. Never feel like you have to apologize in the chat. We love seeing your comments strolling through. We've got a laptop set up. We'll just read them as we go. Thank you for being here. And I hope that we will see you next weekend on the 17th. We will have a very special guest coming on to speak with us named Mallory, and we're very excited to have her on. So join us next Saturday at 3 p.m. and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.
Thank you.